Now, he used to be a household name in the Nigerian music industry some 10, 15 years ago. In fact, no A-list event was complete without the name Mike Okri on it as the performer. But then all of a sudden, Mike Okri surprisingly disappeared from the music scene and from the country altogether. He relocated to the United States of America, well, in search of the golden fleece. We do not know, because everyone in the country at the time thought Mike Okri was doing very well and relocating abroad should not have been an option for him. But he did relocate to the United States, and the stories we heard about his situation in the U.S. were far from savory. Mike Okri is now back home, and the good news is that he is relaunching his music career. He's just released a single which is the remix of that popular track called Omoge. The remix features Omaomi. Well, if I'm permitted now to put it this way, I'd simply say, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Okri now joins me in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I mean,
Yes.
it's quite nice to have you back home at last.
At last, yes, at last.
But tell us, why exactly did you relocate? Because people felt you were doing very well at the time, and that, you know, musicians were very big people at that time, even though they are bigger now, that people like you should not have left at all. You were doing very well.
If you ask me, I'll probably tell you I have no reason. But at the same time, there's sometimes that you just listen to your inner heart about relocating. My case was different. I could say partly spiritual, because I made a choice at a time when, of course, my name was everywhere here in the country. And but again, I have this little excuse to give, most especially to my ardent fans who probably will be wondering. I figure out too that at that time, not very many things were happening to the Nigerian musician, quote unquote, as regards international acclaim. And I needed, that was a time you could go take your works out of the country. Apart from the few like Fela Anikulapo Kuti and then his son. Of course, how did Femi make the huge break? He had to take his music out to France.
Out to France,
and
yeah.
that was a dream for many would-be A-list artists at the time. And I happened to be one of them. Unfortunately, the reverse became the case. Because as at that time, you were taking your music to an audience that wasn't willing to really trade theirs for yours. And the reason was obvious. So it was bad timing. Okay? So my intent was to stay for just 2 years. Unfortunately, I stayed for 12
So the
years.
intention was to go abroad, promote your music,
And then bring it
and
back
then bring
home.
it back home.
Yes, in a bigger form. And because that was a norm. The likes of Morikante did it. And so names like Salif Keita, Baba Mal. You know, so that was an obvious.
So your music was not accepted when you got to America. Was that a rude shock to you?
No, it wasn't that it wasn't accepted, but it was bad timing in the case of where the hip-hop craze was off the roof. And of course, you know one thing about that. America was a bad choice. You understand me? It wasn't like the UK or Europe that is open to all brand of music. So I figured that you could be happening within and in neighboring Caribbean, but that would leave you as a second-class kind of musician.
Well, some people would have said, well, some people would say, if they were faced with such a challenge, they'd probably rebrand their music and
No,
just
there
rebrand
was no need to rebrand because I was unique, and that would have made me, look like someone who was giving in to pressure. I wasn't really under pressure in terms of music. It was just that the opening wasn't there. Because, you see, you could be in the wrong place, in the right place at the wrong time, and it's just as bad as you getting there at the right time, at the wrong time.
Why didn't you come back? When you discovered high life was not the in thing in America at the time, and that high life was still very big in Nigeria, and that you were a very big name in the country at the time, people would have thought, well, after seeing that it was very difficult in the United States to sell your music, bring it back home. And
it was not just about that. I had to look at it both ways. I was also trying to look at things more critically, even back home. Because back home, some of the things that we dreamt of, and hoping that it would take root were not forthcoming. So it means that it was a rude shock for me here back at home as well as
Over there.
overseas. And I'll tell you frankly, it's not all that glitters as gold. Over here, the fans, my fan base was huge, and
Quite huge.
quite huge, and I thank God for that. But the event companies and other corporate companies were not willing to move or invest into the business. I think the sudden break was due to the fact that telecommunications kind of changed everything. And as at that time, I was almost like 7 years out of the country. I was already doing other things. So I figure it was just that timing that changed the dynamics. But that didn't have to make me start rushing home immediately. I knew there were other things I had to develop about myself. I have family to take care of because I was already a father and all that.
Now, I want you to right here and now confirm some of the stories we heard. As you heard in my opening there, I said some of the stories we heard were quite unsavory. There was a story about Mike Okri being a cab driver in the USA. Some people actually came back from the US and said they saw Mike Okri driving taxi around and all of that, and that things had really gone bad for him.
Well, not bad. It's all part of life. But again, if I drive a taxi, and so what? But then I never drove a taxi. I did other odd jobs. I mean, when you go to a country that is not yours and you run out of money, of course you're bound to do something. That's worse than going into crime. But all I did was, yes, I washed dishes. I say that proudly because it's not as bad as, I mean, driving a taxi is not as bad as that, and neither are both. The point I'm trying to make is that, you know, the fact remains that even if I was born with a golden spoon, you see, when you find yourself in a dire situation, what do? You just have to manage through. That was the same period, permit me, the 9/11 happened. A couple of things happened. And of course, I overstayed. I couldn't come back home because the bottom line would be that all efforts throughout the years would have been wasted. So I needed to manage what I have. And part of it was, okay, fine, if I have to leave in what they call God's own country, it means I have to go back to school, further my course.
So you did go back to school?
Of course, yes.
And you earned a degree?
I earned a master's degree as well. And some of the things that opened the doors for me was that I never left music because of my passion for music.
Okay, so all this while, were you doing maybe you were doing gigs somewhere, you were getting invited to do shows?
I was doing both home gigs. When I mean home gigs, Nigerians will invite me, communities will invite me. I also got involved with me doing most of my gigs on a cruise ship, you know, to the Caribbean, because I have to get employed, you know, working on a cruise ship and singing not just my repertoires. I was singing other repertoires as well. So that kept me going. I also got involved in church music, which made that's a story for you in the aspect of whether I'm a pastor or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I sing gospel or not.
We're definitely going to come to that.
So the moment I stand to gain everything, not losing any.
Quite surprising, because you talked about the gospel aspect now of your music. Let's talk about that. You know, we read somewhere that, of course, you've also confirmed that you're coming out with a 14-track album, and that you're now into gospel music. This is quite
very.
It's a radical break from what you used to do. I mean, you're a high life musician. We know the content of your music, the lyrics, and all of that. Even Omelge and the others, and now gospel.
If it's gospel, as people might presume, then why the idea of Omelge? That's contradictory enough. But the point is, it's inspirational music. I never said I was coming out with a gospel album.
Okay.
The idea is for me to come with meaningful music that makes sense, and that's what I stand for. You know, the 14-track album is a combination of all kinds of music that makes your head spin for good.
Let's talk about the remix,
yes.
Omelge. You know, what informed your decision now to feature Omaomi? Were you trying, could it be a situation, could it be you discovered your music might no longer be relevant in Nigeria today. And so that the best way to relaunch yourself and to make it probably more relevant is to get, a younger art like
Yeah.
Omaomi to feature on
Well,
it.
I wouldn't say that was the point. I would say that good music will always be good music any day. Omaomi, for instance, is a wonderful singer. I respect her voice so much. I wouldn't say I knew her personally at the time. I, Omaomi to me was just like any other beautiful female singer like YJ and the rest of Tiwa Savage. But it happened that I could say that it's a promise I made to a dead friend who happens to be a journalist as well. Few weeks before he passed on, we were just on a conference discussion over what should be done and what shouldn't. Now he came up with the idea that, oh, Mike, I'll need you to do some of your old works again. I said, well, and as
Which
at
is a
that
good
time,
idea.
yes, and as at that time, I wanted to have him as a consultant for me. And then he said, well, Mike, I'll need you to do Omoge with Omaomi. I said, Omaomi, why? And just the same question you asked. And I said, yeah, because it's a song that I want you to remix and so forth. And that's Bonaya Madi for you. And then because of the promise I made him, that was the reason why. And then good enough when I met Omaomi, she was a darling. I mean, someone who really has a lot of respect and, honor. And of course, when I invited just one call and then she came over without stressing me out. And then she did a great job and I respect her for that.